So, welcome everyone to our webinar today, How to Meet Your Customers' Demand for Faster Responses. And all right, there's that delay kicking in. Thank you, Chris, for one of the things, what are we doing to appease customers in this fast-paced society? Students seem to require faster responses than business or business-to-business customers. So how can we handle that? Excellent, very good. So for those of you just joining us, we're going to be using chat to submit your questions today, either now or throughout the webinar. My name again is Jeff Toyster, and I'm sharing some research that I've recently completed on email, Twitter, and Facebook response time expectations. And I don't use Facebook for my business, but I do use email, I use phone or text, and of course I use Twitter. So if you'd like to continue the dialogue after today's webinar, you can go ahead and contact me directly. Happy to continue the conversation with you. So thanks to all of you for being here. Really excited to share some of this information with you. All right, let's get started. Our agenda. I want to share some of the results from a recent study I did. I'd like to share some tactics, I think, to help you with response time. Whether you can respond as fast as your customers would like, well, that remains to be seen. We'll give you some tactics to either respond quickly or adjust expectations, or perhaps both. And of course, we'll do some Q&A. So it's an opportunity for you to share what questions you have, and for all of us to try to answer some of those. Hopefully we take away a few action items today that we can implement immediately to improve our responsiveness. So with that, I want to bring you all the way back in the Wayback Machine to the year 2000. And in the year 2000, if you remember, many people were using something called America Online. You got mail. Check email. Now, this is the first time that I remember as a customer service manager supporting email on a daily basis. And in the year 2000, a one-day response time was about right because it matched consumer behavior. So if you don't remember way back then in terms of customer service email, here's how it worked. Most of the time, customers would send a message from home, and they would have a dial-up internet connection, super slow, so they would only check email maybe once a day. It just wasn't a good experience. So they would generally do it in the evening. They would send a company an email, and then as a customer service leader, my team would get those emails the next day. And one business day worked because we would have that full day to respond to that email, so that the next evening the customer comes home from work, logs on to probably America Online or Earthlink or one of those old email providers, and they check the message. And so that cadence really, really worked in the year 2000. Today, in 2018, most of us have access to our email 24/7, and most of us probably access our email not 24/7. We sleep, but we keep our phones near our beds. We can access our personal email at work. We can, for business to business, as Cheryl pointed out, we have access to email almost all the time during our working hours and non-working hours. So we have to understand that the genesis of the one business day email came from a long time ago, and things have definitely changed. So let's look at what the data is telling us now. So to give you an overview of the survey that I did, it was primarily focused on U.S. consumers. So if you are based in another country, then this study may be reflective of your consumers, but I can't tell you for sure because the focus was on people in the U.S. So a little over 1,200 people participated. And I say 1,200 plus because we actually got different numbers for email, Twitter, and Facebook. I used some separate surveys as a way to just to get a different population. So in a way, I had over 3,000 participate, but each group of 1,000 answered just one question. So we asked, how fast do you expect a response to email? How fast do you expect a response to a Twitter direct message and a Facebook message? And the key there for Twitter and Facebook, the messages, you may be aware, these are private versus posting on a company's wall or sending a public tweet. So a little bit different where these are private messages. Okay. So what did we learn? What were the results that we learned? And I want to lead by sharing with you what the results suggested should be our standards. And the standard based upon this consumer survey for email is businesses should reply within 1 hour. Now, for those of you who joined us right at the top of the hour, you may not have seen a poll we did. We did a little warm-up activity, and most of the participants here are sending emails in response to their customers in 4 hours or a day. And what the consumers are telling us is they expect it to be in an hour. And if you want to go world-class, you've got to be able to respond in 15 minutes. So let's break down this data a little bit, and this is where I think it gets interesting. The question on the survey said, here are your choices, which one best matches. Let me turn off the camera here, so we don't want to cover that up. Okay, you don't need to look at me. Look at the graph, it's much more interesting. If we look, which of these best matches your email response time expectations? And the temptation, if you look at this, the most popular choice is 1 day. And some of you say, hey, we're doing 1 day. 43% said 1 day. So how do we come up with 1 hour as the standard? Well, if I look at how many of my customers will be happy with a 1 day response time, I really look at 1 day, 43%, and then any group of customers that said, you know, you could take longer. So that's the 2 day folks, right? And so that's 13%, 13 from and 43, 56% of customers basically said 1 day will meet my expectations. But that also means that the rest of the customers want it faster. And so I keep adding, and the threshold I used was, what would be a response time that would meet the expectations of at least 80% of your customers? So 43 and 13, that's 56. We throw in 4 hour response time, that's another 14. But if I respond in 4 hours, that's only 70% of my customers. We're not at 80 yet. I got to add in 1 hour, and that brings us, okay, 89% of our customers will be expecting 1 hour or response time or longer, but at least I know that I'm meeting the expectations of 89% of my customers on average when I'm responding. So I hope that clarifies how we came up with an hour and why it's misleading. I think you can see you have a large group of customers who are okay with 1 day. The challenge is you just have a large group of customers who want it faster. And so you really have to pick carefully, where do you set that bar? Now, 15 minutes, you notice 11% of customers want us to respond within 15 minutes. And that's where, as a business, you have to decide, well, how many of my customers am I going to make happy? I can't make everyone happy all the time. So is there a certain percentage, for example, that I should focus on? Let's dive into I want to get a little more granular. And this was kind of interesting. If you look, for example, by region, so maybe your business has customers concentrated in a certain region. I was really surprised. The region in the United States, so our options were the South, Northeast, Midwest, and West. I would think the Northeast folks, with their reputation for, hey, got to do it now, I would think they wanted the fastest responses, and the answer is no. Midwest customer wants the fastest response time. 37% want 1 hour or less. You can see by the graph here. So if you have a regional business, your answer might be a little bit different. Maybe if I'm focused on the West Coast folks, for example, the reputation where I'm in San Diego is, hey, we're a little more laid back. Maybe. And the lesson I take away from this is look at your individual customer base to see what they want. And the other thing that sometimes people might be surprised to learn is that it's not the millennials that are asking for the fastest responses. In fact, if you look at the graph here, it's baby boomers that led the way. 35% of baby boomers wanted a response in 1 hour or less. Now, one person earlier, Cheryl, you said, hey, it seems like my customer base is students. They really want a faster response. Keep in mind, your individual customer base may be different than this overall average, but it is, I think, helpful to not make any assumptions. In other words, do your research, do your homework. One of the things you may want to look at is look at customer satisfaction ratings by response time and see, is there a threshold where customer response satisfaction starts to take a nosedive? Maybe it's after 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, et cetera. So this is aggregate data, but definitely look at your own data. So, by the way, if you serve baby boomers in the Midwest, ouch. This was really scary. 47%, do the math for you, 47% wanted a response within an hour or less. So this is the most demanding segment, at least according to this data that we have. So I do have a poll question for you. Now that you think about what you're doing and what the data is suggesting, I want to ask you, how do you feel about responding to emails in terms of your email response time? You feeling great? Yeah, okay. Maybe a little nervous? Anybody getting queasy or starting to freak out a little bit, knowing your customers want a really fast response? Let's see. Let me give you just a second to consider that question, and we'll come right back to you. A few people say I'm a little nervous, getting queasy. Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Probably depends on where you are now versus what your customers are expecting. Hey, someone's feeling great. All right, we saw that pop up. Someone's feeling great. Look, for the most part, we're feeling okay, but nervous and queasy tend to be the top responses. No one's about to freak out. That's the good news. Okay, so in a little bit later, we're going to get to things that you can do to feel a little bit better and make your customers feel a little bit better. So all's not lost. We're sharing some data up front, but then we're going to tell you what to do with it. So we're going to end that poll. Thanks for participating in that. I'm sorry if you're not feeling great right now. So let's talk about Twitter. Now, Twitter, boy, if you support your customers via Twitter, yikes. The standard's 15 minutes. And that's just kind of across the board. And we'll share the data, how do we got there in a moment. But here's one note. Only 40% of people who responded say they use Twitter or Twitter messages for customer service. So there's a big segment of folks that don't even use Twitter, don't even care. But there's the people who do use Twitter, they expect you to respond really, really fast. So I do want to do another quick poll, and that's to ask you, how many of you currently offer support via Twitter? And the other question is, do you do this by enabling direct message? Now, if you're not familiar with this, in the early days of Twitter, a company had to follow you and you had to follow that company for you to exchange direct messages with that company. Now, you may know this now, but today companies have the option, and it is a best practice if you support Twitter, to enable direct messaging without following each other. In other words, a customer can just send you a direct message instantly without following you, having you follow them, etc. So it's inviting them to keep the conversation private. Now, when I'm looking at least the audience for today's webinar, hey, we aren't offering support via Twitter. All right. Oh, a couple of you are. Okay, so here's what we'll do. And you're enabling direct message, some of you not enabling. So since so many people are not doing support via Twitter, we're going to close the poll now. I'm going to spend a little bit less time on that and very quickly share some of the data. Here's the overall data, and the overall data basically says 50% of our customers who are using Twitter expect a response within 1 hour, but remember we use that threshold of what's the response time that's going to make at least 80% of our customers happy, and we need to get to 15 minutes to be able to do that. So that's one thing to really be aware of, that we have to respond quickly if you're supporting via Twitter. The Northeast here is the group that really stands out. So it's not always the Midwest. Midwest is email, but Northeast says, hey, we're the ones that want the fastest response time, and that's at 37% want it in 15 minutes or less. So if your customer base is primarily in the Northeast, you better be on your game with Twitter. Which age group, which generation expects the fastest response? Once again, it's the baby boomers that want the fastest response. So going into this, I must admit, I was thinking it would probably be millennials. We tend to think of them as demanding faster and faster, but no, it's the baby boomers generally that want the fastest response. So just something to keep in mind when it comes to Twitter. Now let's go to Facebook. Facebook messaging, a lot of companies are using Facebook for support. The standard is 1 hour. If you want to be world class, it's 15 minutes. But again, not everybody uses Facebook for service. Email is a much more popular channel. Only about 50% of customers use Facebook and Facebook messaging for service. So let's check with you again. I'm going to do another poll and just to see who's using Facebook to support your customers. And this will help me decide how much time we need to spend here. Most of you weren't supporting Twitter. We spent very little time there, but let's talk about Facebook. Are you using Facebook to support your customers? Give you a few seconds there to respond. It's like 1 or 2 people are. Most of you are not. Oh, okay. A few more folks are about 25% of you are supporting customers via Facebook. Okay, so we'll touch on it briefly in terms of the data, but we won't spend as much time. It looks like email is really the driver for most of you being in the webinar today, which is perfectly fine. All right, so I'm going to end the poll. I do want to remind you as we're going along, if you want to use that chat feature to submit a question, we're setting aside some time at the end for questions, but I can also pause and answer specific questions that you might have along the way. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. So here are the general response time expectations for Facebook messages, and generally it's kind of a more relaxed group than say Twitter. If I'm using the 80% standard, then I need to respond within an hour. That's 83% of customers that will meet their expectations. But there are still those really, really fast people who want 15 minutes or less. So 17% said that. So we have to be careful about who we're serving. And this is also industry specific. So one thing I did not study, and I'll encourage you to do your own study on this, is industries vary. For example, in the travel industry, you're much more likely to have customers who expect a much faster response. Why? Because travel is often time sensitive in that I'm contacting customer service because I've had some sort of disruption in my travel plans, like a flight cancellation. A 2-day Twitter or Facebook response time is not going to cut it when I'm really upset about a canceled flight or getting a seat assignment or something else. So your industry certainly will dictate this as well. Again, it is the Northeast that expects the fastest response time, but not a huge jump. And notice there's kind of this there's almost like two groups, right? There's the people who want the really fast responses, and then like the 1-day group, where there's 33% says 1 day, even 6% says 2 days. Whatever, get back to me when you can. So that could be misleading because you have a lot of customers, and maybe you personally fall into this bucket where some customers are okay with a long response time, but you have also a lot of different customers who want you to respond faster. So something else to keep in mind. Hey, millennials, this is the one platform in my test, at least, for Facebook, millennials wanted the fastest response. 46% of millennials expected a response in 15 minutes or less. Now, some of you are saying, hey, what about like Instagram or Snapchat or some of these other platforms? The numbers just aren't there, for me at least, to study. And what I mean by that is, even though they're widespread in terms of you have millions and millions of users, just very, very few people use those platforms for customer service messaging. So that's the only reason I really excluded those from this study is, from what I can tell, we just don't have a ton of people using it. And even in this webinar today, most of you are only supporting email. You're not supporting Twitter or Facebook, which is fine. Okay, so we got to the part, I think this is why you're here. This is why you signed up for the webinar. What are some tactics that you can use to manage response time expectations or respond faster? And I want to give you just a few. I think the obvious one is we need to staff to the response time that our customers demand. And this is an individual decision. So I know that asking for more money for staffing is often very difficult. And so what I would encourage you to do, if you decide you want to go that route, certainly share with your exec who's signing off on this what the benchmark is based upon the study I'm sharing with you. But you would also, I think, run the numbers. Look at your own numbers to see where does customer satisfaction decline? And where customer satisfaction declines, what's the outcome from that? In other words, are we losing customers? And if we're losing customers because we're not responding fast enough, there's the business case for staffing up to be able to meet the demand. That said, I know some of you may not be able to easily make the case for staffing. So let me give you a few tactics that you can use, and most of these you can use right away. The first thing is I want you to look at your point of contact. And what I mean by point of contact is, where do customers initiate that email, Facebook message, or tweet with your company? And can you use that opportunity to inform them how quickly you respond? Most businesses for email do not do this. And I think it's an opportunity, unless you're lightning fast, to say, hey, we generally respond. For example, if you email me, I must admit I'm a little guilty here. On my contact page on my website, it doesn't have a response time expectation when you fill it out. But as soon as you fill it out, it says, hey, we got it. And generally, you're going to get a response within 1 business day. By the way, this is, I don't know how you feel about this, but something I put just for fun. I get a lot of unsolicited emails, a lot of spam emails. So I put something at the bottom that says, if this is an unsolicited email, you may or may not get a response. I'm not going to promise you anything. It just depends on how entertaining and useful your sales pitch is. But look at this. This one's from Facebook. This is JetBlue. And what's nice about Facebook Messenger is they just kind of automatically populate that. It says, we typically respond within an hour. So that's something you can do with Facebook. On Twitter, you can put that right in your banner for your Twitter profile for your company and just say, we typically respond within an hour. And if it's longer than that, at least you could set expectations. If a customer expects you to respond on Twitter, for example, in 15 minutes, and on your banner it says, hey, we do our best to respond within 2 hours, well, at least you've adjusted those expectations a little bit. So the point of contact is one thing. I'd suggest you can audit that. The second thing is your auto response. So most of our organizations, we have an auto response to email, and you can set up automated responses for Twitter or Facebook Messenger as well. But the auto response can reinforce the response time expectations. I'm going to give you an example here. I blurred out the company name, because I would consider this a poor example. But look at this. So it starts okay, right? Hey, dear customer. Well, okay, that's a little bit of code to put my name in there, but that's okay. I'm not upset. Thank you for contacting, XYZ company. We respond to online inquiries 7 days a week between the hours of 8 and 11 Eastern time. Now, doesn't that imply, if you're reading this, think about the implication of how fast emails are responded to. And then let's look at this next one. Emails are responded in the order that they're received. We will respond as soon as possible. And I just want to ask you a quick, just fun chat question. If you get this auto response from a company, how fast do you think this company is going to respond to you? So I'm just curious. Let me give you a second to share via chat. What expectation do you think this autoresponder sends? Any guesses? And then I'll tell you how quickly they actually responded. But when you see this, what's your impression? And this is where I know we have a little bit of a delay. Yeah, Laura says, not fast enough. 1 day, a day or so. Okay, so interesting, 24 hours. So, which is, okay, so I want to point something. So I said a week. Wow. I wonder if I influenced you by saying this is the bad example, or this could be your own expectations. So I want to touch on both of those. In terms of your own expectations, I think this is dangerous, because if you say, hey, my expectations are generally a day, then it's a little tougher to stomach that our customers sometimes want it faster. They're just different than we are. And that's kind of an adjustment we just have to make mentally, that our customers may look at things differently than we do. As a customer here, I actually expect a fast response. Emails, they're not 24/7, but 7 days a week, in pretty good hours here. And if I'm sending an email during those hours, I expect to get a pretty fast response. It was a little over 2 days before they responded to me. So some of you are right on target, day or so. Yeah, that was about what I got. What I would suggest is a better auto response is a more accurate. I don't really care how often. Respond to online inquiries 7 days a week. That's fine, actually. But the next line should say, we typically respond, and then give, if it's 2 to 3 days, for example, I would say we typically respond within 3 days. Give the worst case scenario. And this is going to do a couple things. It's going to level set expectations for your customers. And it's also going to prevent some repeat contacts. If you look at contacts, often you'll get people who are sending a follow-up message because the first one didn't get a fast enough response. Well, now that's doubling your workload for that customer. So the autoresponder can help. The other thing I think that makes this a poor example is they should have alternative contact information that says, hey, if you really need a faster response, here's a channel that's faster, whether it's phone or live chat or whatever seems to work best. Give them a link to a faster option if they really aren't willing to wait that long. So the autoresponder, a lot more companies have this. Use really clear and specific language to set your expectations. And I'd suggest, if you haven't done this, do a little audit to see what is your autoresponder share. So I have a question for you, and this is going to get at my next piece of advice here. For those of you who have multiple channels that you're supporting, whoops, I pulled up the wrong poll here. Bear with me, sorry. Here we go. If you're supporting multiple channels, do your agents handle emails between calls or chat? In other words, are we juggling multiple channels? But in particular, I'm asking, are we juggling live channels with written or asynchronous channels like email. So you have agents kind of doing email in between other tasks. Let me be quiet for just a moment and let you respond to the poll. All right, interesting here. It looks like we're about 40-60. So 60% says no, and that could be deliberately or that could be just the channels you support. Oh, it's gone up to 43% now say, yes, we do have our agents handle email in between calls and chats. All right, I'm going to end the poll now, but a fair percentage of us, okay, it's gone up and down a little bit. Final, I think we're settling at 33%. Have us do this. I've done some experiments with my own clients, and what I've found is that can lead to slower response times and more errors. And guess what happens? More errors leads to more email. So one of the solutions you can use is to use a channel focus. And here's how this works. If you're going to have people work on email, have them only work on email or other similar messages that are, or written messages. So they're only focusing on one at a time. What I found, both as my own experience as a customer service leader and then later on as a consultant advising clients and doing experiments, is that when you have agents trying to do both, what often happens is their productivity on both channels declines. So let's say they're doing phone calls and channels. Well, they're trying to get that email done. They get halfway through it, the phone rings. Well, there's always this mental reset thing where the phone call might take a couple minutes, not a couple minutes, a couple seconds longer than it normally might. But then when they have to go back to the email, they have to refresh themselves and reread the customer's message again. And it ends up taking longer to send that email. It also ends up more errors being made. When I managed a customer service team and they were doing emails in between phone calls, I initially found about a 30% error rate, which is huge. It's enormous. And this is a long time ago. We were just learning the basics of managing email as a service channel. Hopefully you're not having a 30% error rate, but it was scary. And part of it was scary because they just weren't giving the emails their focus. So the solution that I've found really works well for clients, even on small teams, is you dedicate people to an email channel. But what you do is you monitor call volumes or chat volumes, and you move them away from that channel as needed. So let's say we get a spike. Okay, we're going to get a couple people. I want you to put emails to the side. Let's focus on phone calls. All right, the spike goes down. We've tamed the queue. All right, you can go back to emails now. So it's okay to switch people between channels, but contact after contact, you're going to get faster, better productivity, and fewer errors. And those errors lead often to repeat email and more volume. So if you don't believe me, that's fine. I encourage you to do a test in your own contact center environment to see what that would happen. Okay. So templates. Another tactic we use here is templating. Okay. Whoops. Let's see. Are you still able to hear me? I had just a little beep here. Bear with me just a moment. Okay, I'm doing a quick test. Got a little beep in my ear. Sorry for that. Just want to double check that you can hear me. And okay, great. So it said something on my end. Sorry about that. Thanks for the quick response. Okay, so templating. Many of us use templates, and there's a pro and a con to using a template. And I'm going to give you a great example here. So this is a real email. I've doctored it up a little bit to protect the not so innocent. And if we look at it here, dear Mr. Toyster, thanks for your email. I welcome this opportunity to assist you. I think most of us can recognize that's a template that's pre-written. Now, if I have to write that line or a similar line in every single email, having a template that I can quickly call up makes emails go a lot faster. So for those of you who are using email support and are using templates, templates are not a bad thing. But I sent a message to this company because I'd stayed in a hotel, not really called the Old Town Alexandria Hotel, but it was stayed in a hotel. I didn't get my frequent guest points. And so it's interesting. So templates are often a bit of free form and a bit of template. And it's a little hard to tell in this one because the language is so stiff. But if you look at the second paragraph, I hope you enjoyed your stay at the Old Town Alexandria Hotel. I'd like to refer you to the hotel as they are in the best position to process your request for the missing rewards points. And you may contact the hotel here. So that part might be a template, or if they get a lot of those, that might be a kind of stock message, or there's a good chance that at least some of this was written by the agent, Lizzie, here. And then this last bit, where I'm almost certain is a template. We are always available to assist you. Feel free to call us, blah, 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 or reply to this email. There's a couple problems with this template that I think will generate more email volume and will create dissatisfied customers. And if you look at it, so the first paragraph is, hey, we're here to help you. And then the second paragraph is, we're not going to help you. And then the third paragraph, we're always here to help you. And so we have that disconnect in your template. What sometimes happens is agents just stop reading the template and they'll just kind of enter their portion in a way they send. And the challenge with that is it's very likely if you send an email like this, you're going to get another email that says, hey, why do I have to do the work? I'm really upset. You should do the work, Lizzie. You said yourself in your email, you're always here to help. So in that sense, a poorly designed kind of agent versus template interface, or where the agent stops paying attention to what the template's actually saying, can generate additional email, which makes it harder to respond. That said, though, templates can be really good. And so I think the inflection point here for you and your agents is, if I'm going to use templates, use really smart templates that are well written, they're written in your brand voice, and then give your agents the freedom, the training, and the expectation that they're actually reading customer emails and responding accordingly. And I think that's another issue that we often see agents doing when they're in a hurry. This is really counterintuitive, but when they're in a hurry, we make more mistakes that generates more email volume. I go back to when I first started supporting emails, I found an error rate of 30%. And most of those errors resulted in an additional customer email. And so one of the things that we started having my agents do was slow down to read their emails more carefully. And I asked them to anticipate the logical next question. And it's tough to do if you're just slapping templates out there. But when you anticipate the next question, you say, hey, this person emailed and asked about missing rewards points. And here's how to get those points done. And then on top of it, I might add, the missing reward points are generally posted in 2 business days. And I'm adding that piece is because that's the next question. Okay, if I get my rewards points, when will I see them on my account? Well, I'm going to prevent a future email by anticipating that question and answering that one too. So sometimes going a little slower actually reduces your overall email volume. You get better responses, happier customers, and with a little bit lighter volume, it's easier to respond quickly. It does become kind of a self-reinforcing cycle. Okay, so I shared a lot of data with you and some specific tactics. I want to kind of see if we had any questions that we could answer for you about whether it's email, whether it's Twitter messaging or Facebook messaging. How do we meet our customers' response time expectations? Or are there challenges that you're facing? Or are there other ways that we could adjust our customers' expectations? So we'll give you a moment here. If there's any questions that you have that you want to make sure that I answer for you, I'm happy to do that. While you're doing that, give me just a moment. Let me make sure I get I'll share with you I should have had this at the ready. I'll share with you a link to the research on my blog. We actually went a little bit more in depth in today's webinar. Let me put this up here. Okay, so here's a link to the research, if you can read a little bit more about it. And then we'll also get a replay via email. You'll get a link to this webinar replay that you'll be able to access. That'll probably happen in a couple hours, a little bit later today, so you can always review it, etc. So any questions for me before we end our webinar? Anything you want to dive deeper into? It's a quiet group. I either answered all of your questions and more, or we're still feeling queasy a little bit about responding to customers' emails. I know we do have a delay, so I'll give it just another second here. All right. Well, in that case, I want to thank all of you for joining the webinar today. I hope you got some good information that you can use. And we did have one question. What are some companies that you know that are excellent in replying? One that immediately comes to mind because I'm a customer is Squarespace. And if you're not familiar with Squarespace, it's a company that not only hosts websites, but provides the content management software to allow you to develop your websites even if you don't know any coding. So all my websites are based on Squarespace. I'm a huge fan. I wrote about them in my book, The Service Culture Handbook. And their email response time is from the get-go has been 15 minutes or less, which is super, super cool. If we want to go to the social media world, I think some of the airlines are just absolutely nailing it, especially on Twitter. JetBlue, as I shared, they're really, really responsive. I've actually, about a year ago, I had a flight get canceled on American Airlines, and I was able to rebook my flight in about 15 minutes with one Twitter direct message. So, some of the airlines are really just nailing it. So the companies that are not so good is another question that comes up, not so good in replying. I really don't want to shame any companies for being bad. That's certainly not my intention. But I will say that most companies I do business with are not good at email. 4 hours is still too slow. A day is still too slow. And so I think rather than warn you about some companies to stay away from, one thing I would look at is what are your specific customers saying? And if you can correlate customer satisfaction with response time, that's probably going to give you some very specific information about your customer base. But when in doubt, I really do think we need to be on the 1 hour standard for email in most cases, especially for not a small business. Small business, like for me, right? I'm responding to all customer email. Can I respond to your emails in 1 hour? I can't. There's no way I'll ever be able to do that. But do I respond in a day? Truthfully, I respond a lot faster than a day, but just 1 hour is not realistic. So look at your customer base, look at your own situation and see what you can do there. Great questions. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. Okay, if there aren't any more, I've got my contact information on the screen. Send me an email. Test me. See how fast I respond. See if I live up to that challenge. Call me. Text me. Hit me up on Twitter. I love to continue the conversation. But thank you all for being part of the webinar today. We're scheduled to go for an hour. I always like to end early. Early is better than late. So thank you. I hope you got something useful. And maybe I'll see you at the next webinar. Have a great one.